Lesson 110 starts on page 509, and it's about dividing by multiples of 10. We talked about dividing by just 10 in lesson 105. Now we're going to be talking about multiples of 10, like 10, 20, 30, 40, and so on. Let's just do some practice problems to learn about this. Look at practice problem A. 60 into 122. Now, what you can think about is just going into 120, and 60 goes into 120. Just think to yourself, 6 into 12. That would go into that 2 times, right? So 60 into 120, that would go into it 2 times, right? Because 60 times 2 is 120. So remember, when you multiply by a multiple of 10, you can not a multiple of 10, but when you multiply by 10, you can just add a 0 on to your result, right? So 6 times 2 is 12. 60 times 2 is 120. And so we can just put a 2. We need to put it right here, because we're not saying 60 goes into 12. We're saying 60 goes into 122. And that goes into that 2 times. So do your multiplication. Now subtract those 2. And you get a remainder of 2. So you say 2, remainder 2. 60 times 2 is 120, and then you add that remainder back on. That gives you the 122. That's the number inside the division box. Look at practice problem B. 217 divided by 20. And so we can kind of see there that 20 is going to go into 21 one time. And so we don't have to think of simplifying that division problem at all. So we do our multiplication, subtract, we get 1. Bring down the 17. Now 20 goes into 17. It will go into that 0 times, right? Because that's less than 20. And so we put a 0 up here, then do our multiplication, subtract. Subtraction has to be your final step. You know, we might have gotten confused on that and said, oh, well, 17, 20 won't go into 17, so that's a remainder. That's not right. You have to have subtraction as your final step. So we had a 0 up there that went in to the answer, and then we did subtraction. Now that's our remainder, 17. 10 with a remainder of 17. So, I mean, just think about it. If we would have said 1 with a remainder of 17, we would have had 20 times 1 is 20 plus 17. That's 37. That's not our answer, or that doesn't get us back to the number inside the division box. 20 times 10 is 200. With a remainder of 17, you add that on. That's 217. That's the number inside the division box. So that's how we can check to make sure we did the problem right. Look at practice problem C. 155 divided by 40. So we think to ourselves, 40 into 150, or 4 into 15. 4 would go into 15 3 times, right? So 40 goes into 155 3 times. And so then we do 40 times 3 is 120. Subtract. We get 35, and that's our remainder. We have no more digits to bring down, and so that has to be our remainder, 3 with a remainder of 35. So that time it helped to simplify that problem, and we just removed the 10. 40 goes into 150 in the same way that 4 would go into 15. Let's do one more. 104 divided by 30. Okay, so we can think 30 into 100 here. 30 into 100 is the same thing as 3 into 10. 3 would go into 10 3 times. And so let's go ahead and do that. 30 would go into 104 3 times. 30 times 3 then is 90. Just like 3 times 3 is 9, 30 times 3 is 90. Subtract. And 30 won't go into 14, so that's our remainder. 3 with a remainder of 14. So if you need to, on these division by multiples of 10, go ahead and simplify the problem by taking a factor of 10 out of each of the problems. Say, Like in practice problem D, what we did there, we said, well, instead of 30 into 100, thinking that, we thought 3 into 10. We removed a 0 from each of those numbers. And that just helps us simplify our thinking about multiplication. In the same way that 3 goes into 10 3 times, 30 goes into 104 3 times. Then we do our multiplication, subtract, and we get our remainder. We can always check our work on a problem like that by multiplying the whole number part there, 30 times 3, that equals 90. Then add the remainder on, and that is equal to 104, so we know we did the problem correctly. Well, that's all for lesson 110. Make sure you do investigation 11 next.